By the early 20th century, this man was one of the most widely translated and recognized literary figures on the planet. He was an intellectual peer to the era's leading scientists, engaging in frequent public debates with Albert Einstein on the nature of reality. Yet he never finished law school, spent his childhood fleeing traditional classrooms, and eventually rejected his British knighthood. To Tagore, art was more than expression. It was a tool for dismantling the intellectual and social boundaries that defined his era. His world was 19th century Bengal, a society governed by the rigid hierarchies of British colonial rule. He was born into the wealthy Tagore family, a lineage at the center of a cultural movement known as the Bengal Renaissance. His life's work was a deliberate attack on three specific walls: the enclosure of the classroom, the assumption of Western cultural superiority, and the borders of narrow nationalism. By breaking these barriers, he changed how the world perceived the intellectual capacity of the East. Tagore's first rebellion was against the schoolroom itself, a place he described as an intellectual prison. He argued that true, profound learning required wide open spaces and the unforced observation of the natural world. In 1901, he turned this philosophy into a physical institution called Santiniketan. While Victorian schools enforced rows of desks and rigid silence, Tagore's students gathered in circles under the shade of massive trees. For Tagore, removing the literal walls of the classroom was the first step in allowing the human mind to expand. He next targeted the prevailing view that intellectual and literary sophistication was a uniquely Western trait. In 1912, he published an English translation of his collection Gitanjali. By 1913, he was awarded the Nobel Prize in Literature. As the first Asian Nobel laureate, his win challenged the Eurocentricity of the global literary world, forcing an acknowledgement of Eastern intellectual equality. He spent the following years as a global ambassador, visiting over 30 countries to advocate for a shared global culture. His poetry became a diplomatic bridge, closing the ideological distance between the East and the West. By 1919, the Indian freedom movement was surging, and Tagore found himself in a difficult position between two opposing forces. Following the British massacre at Jallianwala Bagh, he famously renounced his knighthood in protest against colonial violence. But he also faced criticism at home for opposing the narrow, aggressive nationalism that he feared would only create new barriers. This led to a series of respectful but intense ideological debates with Mahatma Gandhi regarding the future of the independence movement. While others focused solely on national borders, Tagore's path led toward universal humanism and the total freedom of thought. His ultimate loyalty was not to a specific flag, but to a vision of universal brotherhood. This vision was finalized in 1921 with the founding of Visva Bharati University. It was designed as a global meeting ground where students from across the world could gather to share knowledge without borders. He built this legacy, writing over 2,000 songs and countless plays, while experiencing the personal loss of his wife, his mother, and several of his children. He turned that personal grief into a lifetime of institutional building and artistic output. Today, Tagore remains the only person in history to have authored the national anthem for two different countries. He wrote the Indian anthem, Jana Gana Mana, and he wrote Bangladesh's Amar Sonar Bangla. His life demonstrates that influence does not come from building borders, but from the courage to cross them. Faith is the bird that feels the light when the dawn is still dark.